G'day, Dave here. Thanks for joining with me to look at the book of James again. We're in chapter 2 and we're continuing an argument about faith and works. Real faith shows itself in action. I want you to pick it up with me in verse 20. I'm pleased that James takes the time to really make his point, that he realises that some of us are slow learners, and so he illustrates that point for us just to make sure that we get it. And what we'll be looking at now is really a continuation of what he had to say about faith and works in the previous few verses. But he realises that sometimes you've really got to stick that point home and illustrate it for people to grapple with and understand what's being said. And that's the case here. And look at how he begins in verse 20. He says, "You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless?" Well, okay, let's take some evidence. Then he says, "Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that said, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone." So he's given an example here of Abraham, who was the father of the Jewish race. Probably this letter was written to Jewish Christians primarily. And so this would be someone that they'd need to take very seriously. I mean, here's one that they would align themselves with. And Abraham's example is one of faith in action. But then he gives a different example, very much a contrast, but still found within the Jewish scriptures. And it's about a woman who was an outsider to the Jewish faith, but who helped God's people. Her name was Rahab, and she was a prostitute. Let's pick it up at verse 25. "In the same way, was not even Rahab, the prostitute, considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." Now, both these illustrations serve the purpose of showing that faith isn't simply words, it's not simply intellectual assent, it's not an academic exercise. Real faith is putting what you believe into practice. You say you believe in God, well, you need to trust God. And the examples that are given here are incredibly dangerous examples. Dangerous. They're costly, massive challenges to say that you believe in God and to do what they did. In the first instance, Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. You can read that back in Genesis chapter 15. But go on a few chapters and you'll see that being put to the test. Because God says to Abraham, you need to take your son and to offer him as a sacrifice on an altar. Now, just to appreciate how extreme this was, Abraham and Sarah had struggled for years. They were literally old people, seriously old people, by the time they had a child. And this child was the child of promise, because God had promised to Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, that there would be many descendants. And now he's being told to offer on an altar, to sacrifice this one son. So here's a serious challenge. Are you going to trust me, God's saying? Are you going to put your faith into action? And you can read about it. It's extremely difficult for me as a father to even contemplate what Abraham does. He takes Isaac and he's carrying the wood up to make an altar, and Isaac asks about the sacrifice. Maybe he's starting to come to grips with the fact that they're not carrying a lamb. He is to be the one who's offered as a sacrifice. It's a massive test to his faith. Are you going to put your faith into action? Now, God had a provision. He was never going to allow Isaac to be sacrificed, but he wanted to know that Abraham's faith was genuine and whether he would go through with what he'd been asked to do, trusting that God was good and that God would provide. And he did. And there was a ram that was caught in a thicket, and that ram was offered as a sacrifice. And God fulfilled his promises through Isaac, and the nation that grew to be Israel flowed from their father Abraham. You see, his faith expressed itself in a dangerous action. It was going to be seriously costly to him. Similarly for Rahab, I mean, she was a total outsider. Her nation was under threat. The Israelites had sent spies in to see what was going on in the land that God had promised them. And Rahab, we don't know a lot about her or what motivated this or how it came about, but the scriptures tell us that she put her trust in God. Her faith was real, and we know that it was real because she, at threat to her life, provided safe lodging for the Israelite spies. And rather than let them be caught, she sent them off in another direction. Dangerous. You've all seen espionage movies. You know that the cost of betraying your country will mean your life. But she trusts God. Friends, real faith will be costly. Real faith will show itself in action. Real faith will be put to the test at times that are costly, that are dangerous. But it will show that it's real by trusting God even at the cost of our lives. We're seeing here what genuine Christian faith looks like. Real Christianity. What it means to follow Jesus. And we shouldn't be surprised that it will be dangerous. Because look what happened to Jesus. He lost his life. And he said to those who were following him, you need to take up your cross. You need to deny yourself. You need to follow me. For many Christians, that's come at great cost. Christians are imprisoned, Christians in jail, Christians who've been tortured, Christians who've been deported, Christians who are cut off from their families, Christians who've been executed, lynch mobbed, Christians who've been martyred for their faith. Will you trust God even if it comes to cost you your life? Well, James' big point at this point is not will you trust God if it costs you your life, but will you trust God to give away some of your money? What's that compared to losing your life or the life of your son? Will you trust God and be generous with what he's given you? Friends, I find this challenging. It's the end of the financial year for us. I'm getting requests from mission organisations, aid organisations. Will you please give to the needy? I need to show compassion. I need to trust God with the resources, with the money, with the wealth that he's given to me, and use it for the sake of those who are in need, because that's what Jesus would do. And that's what genuine Christian faith looks like.